Okay. You guys should be able to hear me now. You guys should be able to hear me now. Let me know. I found out the problem. So, Happy New Year again. Abarigani, Amani, perfect. Amani and Guvu, now Uhuru. Peace, power, and freedom, everybody that's tuning in. Yeah, I'm excited too. Yeah, to our podcast and book club. My name is Ikemba Ajore of We Charge Colonialism, grassroots think tank. I'm excited about this new year. You're going to see a lot more of these study sessions. I'm actually going to have a, a consistent date, which is going to be Sunday at 9 o'clock. So Sundays at 9 o'clock, I'm going to do this study session every week. But throughout the week, I may do a study session from in between Sunday and Sunday. So I'll keep everyone updated with that. But as long as you're subscribe to We Charge Colonialism, you can get those updates. Again, I'll repeat, every Sunday at 9 o'clock, I'm going to do these study sessions, and I may go in a little longer than I usually do. So appreciate you all. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already, and like this podcast and book club. So we're still in chapter 1 of the Blueprint for Black Power, important study. And I just want to say, make a quick comment about Black Power before I go into the book and what that means. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people who tune into this know what we mean when we say Black Power. But from time to time, there will be people who tune in to the study, and there will be this thought of reverse racism. Even in 2023, there's people who still don't understand what African people mean when we say Black Power or the movement for Black Power. And that just shows the ignorance of the history of oppression and exploitation that African people have suffered under the system of white domination. And so Black Power is a pushback against this colonialism that was built in colonial capitalism that was built on racism, right? Amongst other things. But racism was used as an ideological justification for the oppression and exploitation of African people. And so with that being said, as we've been reading in this book, the different methods that has been used to keep Black people in the position that they're in to this very day has been a control over the media and images of African people, where they're able to paint us in a particular light. They're able to use science and philosophy that says Black people, African people, which I use interchangeably, right? Because Black people, they designated African people as Black people, right? So when you are Black and African, there's certain attributes that come with that. There's a certain inferiority that exists within the African community, whether it's physical, biological, right? Biological or psychological. And so we had to push back against that. And we seen the highest expression of that in the 1960s when Kwame Ture had made a call for Black Power. There was a movement, though, prior to Kwame Ture making this call. And of course, like there's always context, there's always a history. And so Kwame Ture didn't just wake up one day and thought about Black Power. There was a whole history and resistance from the Negritude movement, from the New Negro movement, all the way to the civil rights going into the Black Power movement. All of this was the culmination of what will become the Black Power movement in the 1960s. And so this February too, I want everybody to be very conscious and keep on their mind. This February for Black History Month, the theme of the year is Black resistance. And so we're not going to stop in February. We're going to talk about Black resistance from now until we're free. But we definitely want to highlight Black resistance next month, since everybody is going to be looking for Black History Month events. And everybody's conscious, right? Everybody's conscious during Black History Month. So, I'm excited to present a lot of history this coming February. So with that being said, we're going to go into our book, The Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos N. Wilson. And before I do that too, I feel like I don't want to leave off in regards to this explanation of what it means when we say Black Power and the Black Power movement. It is a resistance against white domination. It's a resistance against this idea of white supremacy that has been projected to the world, to us, because if white people are supreme, then what does that mean about Black people? We were always, we represent the opposite of white in this society. And so this is what us pushing back against that. And we look at the Black arts movement, the Black Power movement, these movements during the 60s, the Pan-African movement. All of this is a resistance against these ideas. And it's the structure, ideological structure that's needed to build a African and Black society. So with that being said, let's get into this reading. Just wanted to preface that this study session with that. And I left off on coercion. Oh, let me move that 1 second. Since we good with the sound. So we're going to discuss coercion as power. We've been talking about the different typologies, and we began with force. Force is power, and coercion is force. It's a type of a type of force that's used. Coercion and force can be used interchangeably, but I think in this context, when Dr. Amos N. Wilson is talking about force, he's being very specific in using force and coercion, having two different sections for force and coercion. So we're going to get into what coercion is today. So page 12, coercion is power, for all those people who are following along. The instrumental use of force or the threatened use of force by the power holder to attain the compliance of another is often referred to as coercion. I'll read that again. The instrumental use of force. All right. So there's force. I think when Dr. Amos N. Wilson, and I won't stop again, I'm just going to read through. When Dr. Amos N. Wilson is talking about force, he's emphasizing, when he's making a distinction, he's emphasizing the physical use of force. And he does talk about psychic violence as well. And when he's talking about coercion, I think he's talking about more so ways that influence and manipulation, because both coercion and force is used to get the group, the individual or the group, to carry out something that they wouldn't do otherwise, if on their own volition. They wouldn't do it on their own volition. So coercion and force is used to sort of manipulate the person to do so. But coercion as an instrumental use of force is not necessarily using physical force in this context. All right. So the instrumental use of force or the threatened use of force by the power holder to attain the compliance of another is often referred to as coercion. Coercion is therefore a form of power. It is the utmost importance to note, as did wrong, that a coercer may succeed without possessing either the capability or the intention of using force, so long as the power subject believes he possesses both. That is, the coercive power of the power holder may rest significantly less or not at all on his actual capacity to harm the subject, but may rest more or less completely on the subordinate subject's belief that the power holder can do so. This perspective, commonly referred to as bluffing, allows us to recognize the fact that in many instances, power holders exercise power over their subjects because of the subject's misperceptions and misunderstandings or false beliefs about the power holder's ability to restrict their options or possibilities. Wardenberg refers to this situation as the Oz phenomenon, for it shows that agents are able to coerce other agents by acting upon their beliefs rather than by controlling their action environment directly. He further contends that the coercive power relations can be brought into existence by means of the subordinate agent's false understanding about the ability of the dominant agent to harm him. This is an important source of power for a dominant agent so long as her ability to realize her threat is not questioned and challenged. There's a couple of things that I want to highlight. So he talks about the person who's being coerced. The coercion can happen. The coercer doesn't necessarily have to have the power to be able to force the subject to carry out a certain function, right? They don't necessarily have to have it. They can bluff. They can all they need is for the oppressed or the colonized to believe that they have it. So in order for them to do that, they have to be able to manipulate them, influence. This is why media, the control of information is so important. This is why all of the ideas, the psychic violence that we talked about and that I talked about in the last session is very important, because as long as I can get a group of people or a person or another group of people to believe that they're inferior, that they don't have the capabilities of capability of overturning the system or transforming the system, or freeing or liberating themselves, if they believe they can't do that, or believe that they can't live without being under the domination of Europeans or white people, then they don't necessarily, then the oppressor doesn't have to use physical violence or force or abuse to get us to get Black people, African people, to do what they want. You understand? And so also the way that they can get the oppressed to believe that they have that power, they can also use someone as an example, right? A police officer, if a police officer uses excessive force and murders someone in cold blood, that type of trauma and psychic violence is going to make the next person more hesitant to strike out against a police officer, even if they're doing wrong, right? So you can sit there. That's why when you seen what happened with George Floyd, how all those people were right there. They outnumbered those police officers, but no one did anything. All they did was talk, right? And we can go and look at many examples of that. And so, but what happened is, what we look at the outcome of that when we seen people rise up in masses and they began burning police stations and so forth, right? And so this threat of the masses to that were ready to overturn the system and dismantle the system, it caused the United States to make concessions. And this is when Frederick Douglass talked about power has never ceded anything without a demand, right? So this is so we have to be conscious of our ability to also be able to bluff. The other side of this is the same way that we can be manipulated into believing a certain thing. We have the same power. These people. The other thing I want to highlight is the Oz phenomenon. The Oz phenomenon, right? This is going to tie into what I was about to say. The Oz phenomenon. He's talking about the Wizard of Oz, and I'm sure everybody. Well, let me not assume, but if you've seen the Wizard of Oz, you know that there's this wizard who's supposed to be all powerful, and the wizard is able to grant the people who the Scarecrow, the Tin Man who's looking for a brain, Scarecrow's looking for a brain, Tin Man's looking for a heart. So they go to the wizard because the wizard is supposed to be able to give them these things. And so in order for them to receive these things that they're looking for from the wizard tells them, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to murder this. So they're able to, even though the wizard at the end, we find out the wizard isn't even this all powerful person. But because they believed that the wizard was, they went out and did what the wizard asked them to do. And keep in mind, if you've seen the Wizard of Oz, what the wizard told them to do was to challenge the most terrifying and threatening person in the movie, like the Wicked Witch. Even the wizard was scared of the Wicked Witch. That's why he sent them, right? I mean, I could go see. I'll be talking all too long if I really dissect this. But the point of it all is when the Scarecrow, Dorothy, and all of that, they pull back the curtain and seeing that the wizard isn't as powerful as he projected projected himself to be or exhibited himself to be. So this is the same thing when it comes to the power structure, when it comes to white supremacy, this idea of white supremacy. They're not as powerful as they think they are, or as we think they are. And in order for them to be able to maintain this system, and Dr. Amos N. Wilson talks about this, he says in order for a minority to be able to control a majority of people, you're talking about 10% of the planet, and half of that is men, or less than half of that is men. So you're talking about 4% of the white population, probably 4 or 5%, controls the world, or through military and economic means, they're able to influence and have control and power, exercise control and power over the rest of the world. And the reason that they're able to do that is because of this sort of Oz phenomenon, where we believe that they're more powerful than they are. And there's a history there's a history behind all of that. So I'm gonna read one more paragraph before we close this session out and sum this up. In the next paragraph, he says, while the ability of the dominant agent to coerce the subordinate subject may rest heavily on the subject's exaggerated misrepresentation of the dominant agent's actual capacity to do him harm. Equally and often of greater importance, the ability of the dominant agent to coerce the subject may rest on the subject's misperception and underestimation of his own capacity to successfully thwart the coercive or punitive actions of the dominant agent. The often anemic self-concept of subordinate persons and groups, their low self-esteem, their ignorance of their actual strengths are more the causes of their subordination than is the actual strength of their oppressors. So this goes back to what I was just discussing. And I'm gonna read those last couple of sentences again, just to emphasize it, because we're constantly being psyched out. We're constantly being psyched out on how powerful, the most powerful people on the planet is African people. And I'm not, don't take this as me being racist either. You know, I'm saying this because not just from a biological standpoint, I'm saying this because of the access that we have, like the resources that we have, the land that we have. There's no people that are able to do the things and accomplish the things that we can accomplish if we tap into our power. And the world is dependent on African people. At the end of the day, the world is dependent. Africa saved Europe. What did Europe do? Europe would have died out. Like they were isolated. They were eating each other. I'm not making this stuff up. You look at the history. They came out of the bubonic plague. They were at the end of their rope. And so they had to go across the Atlantic Ocean. They had to they had to do something that they've never done before because they were so desperate. That's how desperate they were. And so they go across the Atlantic Ocean. They come to the Americas. They go to Africa, and they tap into the resources of the Americas, and they tap into the resources of Africa. And the resource they tapped into at the time in Africa was were black bodies. And they began to bring those black bodies to the Americas. And we were the ones who built this system, this social system that we're part of. We built it, not on our own volition. Because if we was at the helm, the system will be a whole lot better than what we're dealing with now. And it will be benefiting us overwhelmingly. And so this is why revolution is so important. And I don't say that in a romantic way, but there has to be a transformation of the system. I feel like I'm digressing. Let me read these sentences again, and we're going to leave it at that. So the often anemic self-concept of subordinate persons and groups, their low self-esteem. Where is that coming from? The media. I've seen somebody talked about the media in the chat. Their ignorance of their actual strengths are more the causes of their subordination than is the actual strength of the oppressors. So it's us psyching ourselves out at this point, right? They did their work. They did their job in manipulating us and psyching us out. But now they don't have to do it. I forgot where I read this at. Was it France Fanon? Who talked about, I think it was France Fanon. Yeah, France Fanon. Like the oppressor, he talked about the oppressor oppresses us for so long that he no longer has to oppress us. We oppress ourselves. And that's a deep statement that I read. Like they no longer have to practice racism. We'll practice it for them. We'll practice racism for them. And so when we talk about his other book, I got over here somewhere, Dr. Amos N. Wilson's book, Black on Black Violence in Service of White Domination, right? Black on Black violence or horizontal violence. He uses the term Black on Black violence, but you know, we're saying intercommunal violence or horizontal violence, right? That we're doing it in service of white people. They no longer have to lynch us and kill us, even though they still are, but they no longer have to do it at a high rate because we're doing it to ourselves. So we have to transform our conditions, our situations, but it begins with this, and this is why We Charge Colonialism is so important. This think tank is so important. And so, you know, hopefully y'all continue to support us and we have these conversations. And as we move forward, I definitely would like to have all you guys who join this discussion to come to the stage and tap in, especially if you have the book and you're studying. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So with that being said, we're going to bring this study session to a conclusion. I know many of y'all, I'm going to just go through the chat really quick before I end it, because I've seen a lot of good statements being made. Norma X, peace, family. Integration wasn't because they wanted it, it's because they were scared and facing a fearless fight for justice. That is so true, so true. Media plays on Richard Sheffield, media plays an important role in undetermining our identity and knowledge of freedom. Psychic violence explains it perfectly. Fact. Appreciate y'all with these statements too. The Norma X, the bubonic plague and everything associated with it had them going into the grave. That's a fact, and that's what I said. Like, we saved them. Like it became a point. We were able to create jobs for these colonists. If you look at the history, they were leaving Europe in droves at first, and then there was a point. There was a point where the Europeans stopped migrating to the colonies. A large majority of them stopped migrating. There was still like merchants and so forth who would migrate because they had the resources, right, to exploit. And but in regards to the working population, they no longer had to leave Europe because of the jobs that were being created in Europe. So now the colonists needed more workers. And that's when you see more Africans being brought to the Americas. Just look at the history. I mean, and I'm talking about the Spanish colonies, the French colonies, and the English colonies, all of them alike. They started bringing more and more Africans because less and less Europeans were coming. And why were less Europeans leaving Europe? Because there was more wealth being created in these colonies by African workers and being sent to Europe. I mean, it wasn't like these Europeans were geniuses and doing anything. We're talking about raw material like sugar, tobacco, coffee. They weren't innovating and creating anything. They were getting wealthy off of our work, our sweat, blood, and tears. And that's why we have to get what's ours. We have to get, as Tupac said, get back everything they owe, because they owe us. And we're never going to be liberated in the sense that we should be liberated with sovereignty and the power to determine our lives or our future, as long as the colonizer doesn't, as long as the colonizer is able to function without having to pay back, without having to pay any indemnity or compensation or reparations. So either they give it to us willingly, or we have to take it. We have to take it. And that's a fact. So with that being said, appreciate you all, everybody that tapped in. Like I said earlier, Sunday is going to be the day that I consistently do these studies, Sundays at 9:00, but I will continue to do them throughout the week. So I'm just going to show, before I tap out, I'm going to show a little promo for our Black Power Fund, and then we're going to peace out. Peace out, family. Peace and Black Power.